My son Stephen, if you ask any person that ever knew Stephen, what do you remember most about him? I think everybody will say his smile. He was always smiling, he was always happy. He was a pleasure as a little boy, and I think there were things as I look back that might have been little clues to me as a parent, but I didn't learn those until much later. When Stephen started when we moved to Nutley, he was starting junior high. He had a great 3 years here in this school, and when he went to high school, his friends started to experiment with drugs, and I didn't know that. People say to me now, were you in denial? And I can clearly say I was not in denial, I was in ignorance. I did not know that people like me could have a child on drugs. I was what I thought was just the average American family. We were active members of Grace Church. We went to PTA meetings. I was class mom for every one of my kids. And I thought that all those things were the right things to do, and I still believe they're the right things to do. But where I was wrong is I thought that that kind of guaranteed me that my children would follow the right path. And so when Stephen first started to experiment with drugs, I did not see the signs at all. Because things that would have been signs, I just didn't know. And his friends, they got together and they would go out and they would be having a good time. And I think I first started to notice that he was a little hard to get up in the morning, which was really different rather for Stephen. He was always one that you just pop your head in the door and say, time to get up, and he'd bounce out of bed and he'd be lively and happy. And it started to get hard to wake him up, probably in his sophomore year. And I thought, well, I guess that's what happens to kids when they get to be teenagers. They're grumpy, they're tired, they stay up too late, and things like that. And so I just kind of ignored it and went with it, if you will. And then I noticed that he started to lose some weight. And I said, Stephen, you look like you've lost weight. And he said, yeah, I'm trying to eat better. Sounded logical to me, because again, it's hard, I know as an audience, sometimes people must say, boy, she was pretty dumb. But I just, like I said, truly believed that we had security against that kind of a lifestyle that other people had. And I know now that that's not true. He started to look run down, I guess run down is the word. I looked and noticed that he had circles under his eyes a little bit. And this went on through the end of his sophomore year, kind of through his junior year. He had issues that he would come home late. He was supposed to be home at a certain curfew. He wouldn't be there. One time, one of the janitors from the school here called me at home and said, I saw Stephen in the park diner last night at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I said, oh, that's impossible. He was sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning. But then I thought about, could he have been out of the house? And I asked him, were you out of the house last night? No. And I thought, well, I guess the janitor thought it was Stephen, it must have been somebody else. And so little things like that started happening, that we were having what I thought was kind of a rough teenage years that he was going through. But he still was managing to get to school every day. His grades were fair enough. He was never a stellar student. He had some difficulties from the very first in reading and things. And when he started his senior year, I was starting to get concerned that maybe he had mono. I remember these things kind of running through my mind, and it kind of kept going like this, with little things bothering me, but not enough that I really said, I have a problem here. I really just thought this was all teenage stuff. And around Christmas time of his senior year, I put it in the back of my head that after the holidays were over, we should take him for a checkup and make sure that whatever was going on, he just didn't look right to me. And right after Christmas, he had a job in a machine shop, and they loved him there. He was very talented with machines. As a 3-year-old, Stephen could take apart my vacuum cleaner, and when I looked at it in horror in 10 pieces on the floor, he'd have it back together again in an hour, working perfectly. He could put any machine, take it apart, put it together. And when he got this job at the machine shop, he really loved it, never missed a day. And shortly after Christmas, I went to drive him there, and his boss, who had become a friend of ours, came out and said, hey, Steve, take a couple days off and get your act together, and then come back. And that really kind of hit me hard. I remember that day. I remember that it seemed really serious. So when he got in the car to go home, I said, Stephen, what is going on? Something is not right. I feel it. I know it, but I don't know what it is. And he looked in my face and he started to cry and he said, I'm addicted to heroin. And I felt like somebody dropped me into the twilight zone. I was waiting for him to start laughing and say, just a joke, Mom, I'm just kidding. Except I kept looking and saying, he's not laughing. He is serious. And it was such a shocking thing to me. My mind started to race, but I went right into what I call the mom mode. You know, I'm the mom, he's my son, he has a problem, so it's my job to fix it. It just went that way. And so I said, okay, what do I do, what do I do? You know, we went back to the house, and I frantically started looking through, we used to have phone books back then, and I was looking for places, who do you call? I was afraid to call the school because I thought, oh my goodness, if I tell the school I have this problem, they'll throw him out of school. And I was afraid to call the police and ask for help because I thought, what if they come here and arrest him? What if he has drugs in our house? All these things I know now are kind of silly that I could have probably reached out for help, but I didn't know who to reach out to. And we didn't have SAC counselors at that time at the school. We didn't have a lot of parent information about drugs the way we have now. And so I frantically tried to find some place, and I hit on a couple of rehabs, and when I called them, they asked me questions like, do you own a house? I think, well, what are they asking me if I own a house for? You know, I want my son to get into some kind of treatment. And we finally found a place up in northern New Jersey that was going to take him. It was a wintry snowstorm, worst kind of storm. And the lady said to me, you're going to have to bring $10,000 in cash. I'm thinking, what? When am I going to get $10,000 in cash to bring to this place? Because she didn't think my insurance was going to cover much of the treatment. And she said, I'm sorry, you either pay for it or we can't take him in. It was very cut and dry. And so we quickly went to relatives, friends, borrowed, got what we could get quickly together, and we took him up to the rehab, which was going to be a 30-day program. And I felt, okay, you know, I'm starting to take a breath now and say, we've got the answer. We found treatment. Now this is going to be over. And I said to him so many times, it's going to be okay. You know, you're going to be over this. It'll be done. And when we sat down at the treatment place, the director said to me, you do realize that of 100 kids that come through this treatment program, only 3% get into recovery. And when I tell my story to kids, I say, think about that a minute. If you were going to buy a car, and the salesman said to you, there's only a 3% chance that this car is going to run after you pay me, who would buy it, you know? But when you have no other options, and I was sort of an optimist. I said, okay, if there's 3% of kids are going to get better, my kid's going to be one of them because there's no other option to me except he's going to get better. And throughout the first time I went to visit him at the treatment center, he would not come down to see us. He wouldn't come downstairs. And I didn't know why. I was very upset, very hurt. Later, he said he just couldn't face us, you know, when he started to talk about some of the things he was doing, I guess, with counselors. He told us we had to go to parent education meetings and family meetings. And what shocked me about the place when I got there, the first time we went, I said to my husband, what kind of people are going to be out there? It's going to be really, you know, it's going to be weird. There's going to be not people like us. And we got there, and guess what? There were all people like us. There was people, rich people, poor people, white people, black people, every kind of person you could imagine there with a child in the treatment. And it was probably the first time when I started to realize that this terrible problem was not just for a small group of bad parents with bad kids, that it infiltrated all kinds of families, and that anybody could be suffering the way we were suffering. And so we finished out the treatment, and at the end of the 30 days, the counselor said to me, I'm not optimistic. I said, what do you mean you're not optimistic? He's finished 30 days here. He got 3 little marbles that you get, you know, for doing the 3 things that he had to do to be released, and I still have those marbles. He's going to be cured. And she was kind of like, well, I hope so. But she wasn't optimistic. And he came home, and I guess it was about 2 weeks. He tried really hard. He really, really wanted it to be over, but he relapsed after about 2 weeks. And so we got him in another program. And he tried really hard at that time. And this was a heartbreaking time in my life because he was trying so very hard. And he'd say to me, Mom, I never thought this could happen to me. I never thought. He said, you know what I thought? And this is what kids do think. I teach 8th grade now, and I have for a long time. So I know the kids believe this, even though we can, as adults, can laugh at it. He said, I thought kids in middle school and high school fooled around with pills and drugs and things like that. And then when you went to college, you gave that up and you drank beer. That's how you got high. And then after you went to college, you got a job and you got married and you had a life like you and Daddy had. He said, that's what I thought happened. He said, I didn't know that you could become a drug addict from going to a few parties and using some drugs that you didn't know what they were, or taking drugs from people when you weren't even sure what they were going to do to you. And he had become addicted very quickly to heroin. He said after about the first, second, third time he used it, he was looking for more. And I think Mike will probably, confirm that that happens to a lot of people. It's an opioid is a drug that can get you really quick. When he came home from his second treatment, my husband said, I'm going to take him to work with me every day and keep him with me. I'm not going to let him out of my sight, because we thought maybe that would be the answer. So we tried that for a little while. He was homeschooled, and my husband took him to work, and we tried watching and watching. And I used to search his room every day, thinking, I'll make sure there's no drugs here. I'll make sure he's being, we thought we could police him into being cured, and that doesn't work either. And he managed through homeschooling and through looking back on it, I think probably the school was just ready to get rid of him at that point. He did graduate from Nutley High in 1994. 10 days before graduation, he turned 18, and we were cautiously optimistic that we were working towards him being cured. And then 3 days after graduation, he came home on a Friday night, and he said, my friends and I were going to go down to the beach, celebrate graduation. I said, okay. I said, you know all the rules and everything, and if there's any partying, you have to, I know, I have to keep away from it. I know. So he was going to go in and take a shower. And I guess I was just really hoping at that point that we would see an end to this someday, although I was starting to lose my optimism about it. I was starting to become more realistic about how hard this was and how dangerous it was. And I remember saying to my brother-in-law, calling him up and saying, I'm afraid he's going to die. And my brother-in-law said, I am too. And he went down, he got ready to go to the shore. He went in to take a shower. And he was in there a long time. And I don't know about you, but in my house, if somebody was in the shower, you couldn't turn the washing machine on, or that person would get blasted with cold water. So I wanted to do some laundry. I said to my husband, go knock on the door and tell him hurry up so I can get this wash in. And my husband knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And with what we had been through, we panicked. We both panicked. And my husband pushed the door in, broke the lock. And Stephen he actually was dead on the floor. We didn't know that at that time. Called 911. 23 years, and it's still a little hard to get through this part. They came, they tried everything. The first aid squad was wonderful. They tried everything they possibly could do to bring him back. They didn't have, is it called? Narcan. Now, they didn't have that at that time. And they took him to the hospital. They put a pacemaker on his heart, but it wasn't to be. And they were not able to revive him. So 3 days after his graduation, he died. There is nothing that will devastate anybody's family as much as losing a child. And so, when people say to me, when I talk to parents now who have kids who are getting involved with drugs, and I'll say, you have to really be tough. And they say, oh, but it's hard. And my answer is, nothing is as hard as planning your child's funeral. Nothing.
And nothing is as hard as getting through the years after you lose your child and getting on with your life, because I had other children and I could not fall apart. I had to be there for my other children. And there is nothing that you have to do to protect your children, to enlighten yourselves, to learn, that's harder. It's all hard, but nothing harder than that. And some of the things, as I look back, were clear signs that I didn't know about. I remember finding in Stephen's room big pens with no pen in them, just the tube. A lot of them. What the heck is he doing with these pens? I know now that they were using the pens to snort the drugs. I would go in the kitchen drawer, and I had 12 forks, 12 knives, and 3 spoons. And I'd say to all my kids, where's the spoons? Who's taking the spoons? And I was always blaming my youngest daughter, thinking she went outside, digging in the garden with them or something. I didn't know that when you burn the heroin, you blacken the bottom of the spoon, and it's very hard to come off. And so he would throw the spoons away rather than put them in the drawer partially clean, thinking he was hiding it. I noticed alcohol swabs around his room a lot, little packets. And I'd say, what are these? He'd say, oh, my skin is bad. It takes the oil off my skin. A drug addict will have an answer for anything. And when you are not thinking it can happen to you, when you have that mindset, I don't know whether your mind just wants to believe those things or you just don't know any different. But it was only later when I started putting them together and saying, these are some signs that should have alerted me sooner. Now, people have asked me, do I think if I had been alerted sooner, could I have saved him? I don't know. I don't beat myself up about the things I didn't know, because I do know one thing. I could not have loved him more. He had every bit of my love for his whole life. So if it was going to be 18 years his life, then I know I gave him best of my love. But I think for other parents, if you can find signs and know that my good kid, my athlete, my straight-A student, that's what I really learned. Kids on the honor roll do drugs. Kids that play football or soccer or basketball do drugs. Kids who, like science or like math and have great futures ahead of them, sometimes they do drugs. Because I don't believe anymore that there are any bad kids. There are good kids who make bad choices. And it can happen to anybody. And so I think, the message out there that I really want to get to people is to be alert to those signs, and maybe getting help early is a good answer. To not be afraid. I think Nutley, Lisa Casilli is God's blessing to Nutley, because I know, Lisa, when you came to this town, you started opening up and enlightening Nutley to realize that it is a wonderful town. Nutley, even though I don't live there now, will always in my heart be my hometown. But just like every other town in America, every town has drugs. You're not a bad town if you have kids that are doing drugs. It's just out there. It's out there all over the country, in every town. And I've lived in 3 different towns since I lived in Nutley, and drug problems abound everywhere, sadly. So that's one thing. So when the community is able to look at one another and say, we're trying to help. We're not trying to say this doesn't exist. We're not trying to say it's somebody else's fault. And if your family member, neighbor, friend, somebody you know has a child on drugs, what can you do? That person, that mom, that dad, they need someone to go over and give them a hug and tell them, you were a good mom. You are a good mom. And what can I do to help you? Can I watch some of your other kids? Can I cook a meal for you while you're running back and forth to treatment centers? I think to become a community like that reaches out to one another and says, if one child in our community is on drugs, then we all have to pitch in to help. I didn't find too much of that. I lost a lot of friends after Stephen died, people who didn't want to be near me because they thought we must be one of those families. I think that being kind of tough with our kids, I was blessed greatly in 2002, early 2003, to be able to adopt a little girl who was one year old, and she's now 15, and she's brought great joy back into our lives. And she's a great student, she's a great athlete,
But I want to tell you, if you open my linen closet, you see 2 drug test kits.